Welcome to Nobody Told Me. I'm Jan Black.
And I'm Laura Owens. We're glad you could join us for this very important episode because we're going to find out what you can do if you're in a situation where an assailant is trying to harm or even kill you. Our guest is internationally known self-defense expert Tim Larkin.
Over the years, Tim has trained elite military, special forces, and law enforcement units, in addition to corporate and civilian clients. Tim's books include How to Survive the Most Critical 5 Seconds of Your Life, Survive the Unthinkable, A Total Guide to Women's Self-Protection, and When Violence is the Answer, Learning How to Do What It Takes When Your Life is at Stake.
Tim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So talk to us a little bit about your background and how you became a self-defense expert.
I was a Navy brat growing up. My father was a military officer, a naval officer. And I got introduced to the SEAL teams when I was about 12 years old. I lived literally right across the street, Navy housing from where the SEALs train. And that's what I wanted to do. And I had a martial arts background growing up because, growing up on Navy bases, basically wherever you go, usually there's some sort of a martial art being trained at the local, fitness facility on base. So I got into martial arts early on. I always had a fascination with it. When I got into the SEAL teams, I went through training. I was 2 weeks away from joining the SEAL teams, finishing my training, and I had an accident. I had a diving accident that injured my eardrum. It burst my eardrum, put me into vertigo. When you burst your eardrum, you can empty out the inner ear of the semicircular canal fluid. And what that does is you lose all sense of balance. It was the first time in my life that I'd ever lost complete control of my body. And this was injury to the human body. And it literally ended my career as a SEAL, operator, because if I can't dive, which I can't dive because of my ears, you can't obviously be in the SEAL team. So they switched me over into the intelligence community. And what I thought was the end of my career actually was the starting of a brand new career that I didn't even know about was about to happen. And it was all because of that injury of the human body. When I understood that being bigger, faster, stronger doesn't prevent you from being injured, which sounds logical to people, but when it comes to your self-protection, people tend to get that really wrong. That became the whole, turning point in my life where I was able to teach, any human being, regardless of gender, regardless of size, regardless of their, what they think their perceived abilities are, to use, this information of injury to the human body to protect themselves against bigger, faster, stronger opponents.
And your latest book is called When Violence is the Answer. And in it, you say that violence is rarely the answer, but when it is the only answer. Tell us more about what you mean by that.
Yeah, people love the first part of that statement, when violence is rarely the answer. And we can all name those times. The more interesting question, and this is why I wrote the book, is what about when violence is the answer, when it is the only answer? And that's the interesting part, because when you clearly define, when the tool of violence would ever be justified in being used to, protect yourself, you quickly realize that the situations you're talking about, that's literally the only tool left to you. And what I mean is you're at a point where either you've ignored warnings or it's everything's imminent, meaning there's imminent grievous bodily harm coming at you, meaning a bigger, faster, stronger person is trying, or people are trying to control you in some way, shape, or form and injure you. And the only thing, if you get to that point, the only thing that's going to get you out of there is the knowledge of how to use violence.
So it's never best to try and reason with somebody first if they have a weapon or if you feel like you're in an imminent danger situation.
I think a better way to put that point across is a story that I use often to talk about the differences. There was a young lawyer in London who he was working late one night. It wasn't a bad part of London that he lived in. Got off the metro, the tube station, and he was followed. And he walked through a park. He took a shortcut through a park, but it was very well lighted. It wasn't he wasn't really taking what he thought were risks. And he was followed by two people that followed him off the tube stop, and they attacked him. They pulled knives and they put him up against a tree, and they demanded his watch, his wallet, everything. And that part of the story everybody likes because he was able to use his negotiation skills. He was able to sit there and say, fine, yeah, take this, take that. What do you want? What do you want? Great, take it. Did everything exactly the way that the authorities would tell you to do things. Don't resist. Don't put up a fight. And they left. And that was great. And he was kind of relieved. And then he starts, taking off, going back towards his house. And then all of a sudden they come running up behind him. They had come back. Mm-hmm. And when they came back, the knives were drawn, their heads were down. There was no communication whatsoever. And they ended up stabbing him 8 times and killing him.
Oh my God.
As he was being stabbed, people heard him, people said they heard this young man yelling, basically, why? I gave you everything. It's my goal whenever I have a new client that situation becomes crystal clear to them, the differences between the two. The first situation where he was able to use his communication skills when he was up against a tree with a knife to his neck, he was able to communicate with him, because even though it was unpleasant, it was basically antisocial aggression, meaning there was still communication going on. And he chose to use his communication skills at that point, and it had a favorable result. Mm-hmm. What the whole reason the book was written on is the second part, because the second part is how people end up seeking me out. And the second part was when their heads were down, their knives were drawn, and they ran him down. The only thing that would have worked is the tool of violence, and he had no idea how to employ that correctly. He had no skill sets for that. And the thing that triggered that, people always say, well, what triggered the fact of them coming back? They literally walked back, and this is from police interviews after, and they looked at each other, the two guys that had just, robbed him, and said, he saw our face. That's probably not good. And that was it. That was their impetus to just run him down and stab him to death. And so I know it's a really extreme story. I know it's hard for people that aren't familiar with these predators and what they're like. But that's my whole goal. There's aggression, which is avoidable. Normally, antisocial aggression are things that we think we need to respond to with violence and or aggression, but we do it by choice. We still have choice available. On the other side of the equation, the second scenario that I talked about, the individual is devoid of choice, meaning this act of violence is going to happen regardless of whether he tried to protect himself or not. And not having the skill sets, he basically participated in his own murder the second time. That's not to put him down. It's solely on the predators. But my job is to inform, the people that come see me and my clients of the realities. Oftentimes we have a view of the world that we wish it was a certain way. And I absolutely agree. I understand that all things working perfectly, you should be able to go unmolested in your life, and you should be able to do what you want. But my goal is to really talk to people about the reality of the world and how it actually operates. And, oftentimes that involves taking precautions and taking actions that are unpleasant at times for us. Meaning it's unpleasant to walk away from somebody that is, saying derogatory things towards you or making, aggressive gestures towards you. But that's the idea. When you understand where violence can go, you make much better decisions. And that's probably the biggest change in why would anybody even look at this subject. The reason most people, especially women, need to look at this subject is because we make false assumptions oftentimes. Oftentimes when we're talking to another individual, we think we're talking in the same social setting with the same mindset. We make these really bad assumptions that the predator on the other side is just like us and would respond to what would work with us.
Right.
And tragically, that's just not the case.
Nobody Told Me is brought to you by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with over 20,000 classes in business, design, and technology.
You can take classes in social media marketing, data science, mobile photography, creative writing, you name it, they've got it.
So whether you're trying to deepen your professional skill set, start a side hustle, or just explore a new passion, Skillshare is there to keep you learning and thriving.
Skillshare offers classes in subjects that are fun and profitable. Some of the classes I'd love to take: social media advertising, building your own brand, and building an Etsy shop that sells.
Join the millions of students already learning on Skillshare today with a special offer just for our listeners. Get 2 months of Skillshare for just 99 cents.
That's right. Skillshare is offering Nobody Told Me listeners 2 months of unlimited access to over 20,000 classes for just 99 cents.
To sign up, go to Skillshare.com/NTM. Again, go to Skillshare.com/NTM to start your 2 months now.
That's Skillshare.com/NTM. So what could this guy have done the second time these guys came back and decided that they really were going to kill him because he had seen their faces? What could he have done? Could he have done anything?
See, that's the question. I mean, everybody wants to, okay, what's a cool technique he could have done or something? And there's many things. I mean, I teach, my goal is when people come to train with me, they don't get lectures. They actually immerse themselves in the physical in a good educational way. You need to understand how to injure the human body, injuring on the human body. The reason you need to understand injury is because when you truly injure somebody, and everybody who's listening has had this type of effect happen to them if they've ever stepped on a sharp object or they've touched a hot stove. What that triggers is the trauma of the hot stove or the sharp object that you step on produces enough of a stimulus that your arm automatically moves away from that without thought whatsoever. Your brain has no control over the situation. It is reacting, trying to protect the body. There's a response in the body that automatically does that. And then after the fact, your brain registers what happened. You said, oh, I burned my finger. It's done to protect the body. But the interesting part about that is when you understand injury of the human body, you can actually take a person's brain out of the equation to where they can't control their body. And that's the value of learning injury, because it doesn't matter if the guy's much bigger, faster, and stronger than you. These areas of the human body just can't be protected, no matter how big everybody is. So the idea is there were a lot better decisions he could have made. There are many things he could have done prior to the event happening where he could have made better decisions. When it got down to that, basically what he had to do is he had to be able to exploit opportunities. When the predators are close to him, he had to know where to go on the human body to get a result. And that's the information he didn't have.
And where would that have been?
It depends. It depends on what part of the profile that he's facing. Meaning there's over 120 to 30 targets on the human body, areas of the human body that you can put force into that get a result. We know a lot of the normal ones that people talk about all the time are things like eyes, groin, and throat. But there's many other areas of the human body that you can affect. But you don't want to have a tactical conversation right now. Meaning, okay, what targets? Everybody wants to just give me 3 things to memorize. And the reason we say that all the time, and we would never do that in anything else that was really important. Like if you were trained to be a doctor, you wouldn't say, "Hey, just show me the 3 best procedures."
Right.
But we do it. And I'm not equating this to medical knowledge. What I am equating it to is you want options. You want to learn principles of protecting yourself. You don't want to learn just 1 or 2 tricks. Principles are understanding injury to the human body, trauma to the human body. Meaning the idea is if I inflict trauma on the human body, any one of us, will be affected by that. And so it's the idea that when you study alpha predators, when you study, like I go in the prison systems and I've studied a lot of the prison gang leaders and how they look at violence and what they do. And I do that because oftentimes some of the best information comes from the worst people in the worst parts of society. And it doesn't mean, we would never employ it in a criminal manner, but the information's still good. I can show an effective injury to somebody that may have been done by a criminal. I could sit there and say, okay, this was criminal what this guy did, but look what he did. He got a result on the human body. And that's good information for us to know if we ever have to protect ourselves. And this is it. We'd never use it in the context if the criminal shows it. But in the context of us trying to protect ourselves and save our life, it would be absolutely justified.
And I think it's really interesting, too, that not all criminals are very big, but they seem to have more willpower than a person if they're trying to overtake them or when adrenaline is involved. Why is that?
They have intent, and that's all it is. Meaning their intent is the intent to do harm. And that intent trumps people, as far as technique and stuff. Like, you'll see very highly trained fighters and martial artists, and they look great in the ring and they do well. And I'm not saying that they're not capable of protecting themselves, but what I am saying is they are able to understand that they don't have to compete. They just have to understand destruction. And I do the same thing for my clients. My clients think of competing. Like, most of us look at a bigger, faster, stronger individual, and we start thinking about, oh my God, they're so much stronger than me. They're so much bigger than me. They're like, somehow they're immune to all the things that make us human. Mm-hmm. And the trick with the predators, the people that you're talking about in the prison system, is two things. One, they don't look at the differences in a human body. They look at the similarities.
Interesting.
So a person could literally they could be 5. I'll try not to I won't give you like graphic examples of it. Because I'm not trying to, I try not to be graphic. I try not to be gratuitous with just description sometimes, but oftentimes it actually does help. So if I think it'll help, I'll give you a more graphic example of it. But basically, the prisoners have two things. They look at all humans as the same, meaning they would look at a guy who's 6'7", 280 pounds, not an ounce of fat on his body, and incredibly aggressive. And they would say, oh, look, he has a collarbone like me. He has a throat like me. He has knees like me. They would look at all the similarities of the human rather than saying, oh my God, he's so much bigger than me, so much stronger than me, because they understand there's no useful information there. Okay, he's bigger, faster, and stronger than me. That's a given. That's a given that when I'm going to be facing, somebody, that's going to put violence on me, most likely, if I'm smart, I've assumed three things. I've assumed that there's going to be multiple attackers, not just one person. I've assumed they're going to be bigger, faster, and stronger than me. And I'm also going to assume that they carry weapons. And so that way it takes care of all the potential outliers that are out there and the real, everything that operates in the real world. And they look at that. And then the other thing that they have is they never look at violence from anything but the winning side. And what I tend to do with audiences all the time, when I'm in one of my speaking events or something like that, is I will show a scenario where somebody is, say, being choked by another person. So we'll see. So imagine one person, you're just looking at two males, and one male is literally physically choking the other male, and the other male is reacting to the choke. And I'll tell people, I'll go, okay, usually it's the end of my one of my presentations, I'll say, okay, what would you do in this situation? And then, I'll take audience response. Some people would say, well, it looks like I could kick him to the groin, or it looks like I could use, my arms and I could knock his hands off of my throat, or, some way of wrenching the choke off in some way, shape, or form. And then I nod and I tell, hey, that's all good information. I go, would you like to see what I would do? And they say, yeah. And so then I replace myself with the person who's choking the other guy. I continue to choke him, and then I'll do about 3 or 4 more strikes, taking the guy to the ground non-functional. And people just, there's like a hush in the audience. And I have to explain, and they go, well, no, you didn't say that. I said, no, listen to what I asked you. I asked you, if you found yourself in this situation, what would you do? You all chose to take the victim profile. You all chose to see yourself as a person being choked because you could never imagine in your mind, where it would ever be okay for you to start out choking. And then I give them an example. I go, what if the first attacker, you just finished off your first attacker, you look back and you see, oh my gosh, there's a second guy. And the first thing you see is his neck. And the only thing you can think of is just to step in and start choking him. Why couldn't that have been the story that you tell yourself in your head? Because we've stigmatized violence so that we see if we ever see anything that we think is unfair or graphic or anything like that, we never allow ourselves to be in that dominant position. And so there's nothing wrong with seeing yourself on the winning side of violence. As a matter of fact, for your people, everybody listening to this right now, I would give everybody this homework. And if nothing else, it'll mentally change how you look at the subject and really help you should, God forbid, you ever need information on self-protection. If you merely just, every time you see an act of violence, it can be a movie, it can be on TV, it can be on the internet, or what it is, get over the story. Don't look at the story. Look at who ends up winning in that situation? And when I say winning, meaning the person that walks away or is dominant in the situation. And then ask yourself, okay, what did they do? Where did everything change in the other person's favor? You'll usually see an injury to the human body. And then if you want to make yourself even more immune to, defensive thinking, you would say, well, how could he have done it better? Was he efficient that way? And what I'm saying, you're looking at, from our aspect of it, it sounds really hard to do, but think about yourself as a coroner. A coroner can have empathy for the murder victim. But when the coroner has to start the description of the analysis of everything that they've seen, they get very clinical and they talk in straightforward terms. This is what happened to this person. This is how it happened to them. The knife went in here. They made their defensive wounds here. That's how you should talk and protect your brain when you're looking at violence. You should only see yourself being successful using the tool. That does not mean you condone the criminal act that you're seeing. It's just you protect your brain, because that is critical in being able to protect yourself. And that really, I hope you understand how that answers the question that you're answering, because every prisoner, they did a study a while back where they showed a bunch of the prison population self-defense videos. And they said, what do you think of this? And the most interesting thing they took away from it was not one time did they ever look at the defensive side of things where somebody was trying to keep somebody from doing something to them. They only saw themselves on the winning side of violence each and every time. And if they made comments, it was to improve upon the violence that they saw. They said, well, he did this, he did that, was okay, but I would have done it this way. And what they're doing is you're absolutely protecting yourself. This is not a light subject, because very few people teach this aspect of it. This is what can absolutely save your life. And when I talk to my clients, this is, unfortunately, the ones that have had to use the information, this is what they come back saying was the most valuable, was the fact that they immediately focused on what was available to them and what they could do to the other person, rather than what was either being done to them or, what they would try to get out of. So they wouldn't sit there. If something had already been done to them, maybe they'd been thrown up against the wall or had their feet kicked out from under them. They didn't try to undo that last act. What they saw themselves as, okay, this is the position I'm in right now. There's his body, what's available to me. And the first thing that hopped out of them was a way to injure the person.
We're thrilled to have you as part of our Nobody Told Me family of listeners. And we know a lot of you love dogs like we do.
So why not turn your love of dogs into a money-making business? Become a pet sitter for Rover.com, the largest network of 5-star pet sitters and dog walkers in North America. Rover.com connects dog owners with trusted pet care whenever they need it.
Rover lets pet sitters create their own schedule, set their own rates, and choose which services they'd like to offer. Pet sitting, dog walking, in-home dog boarding, and doggy daycare are some of the services you might want to offer.
Through Rover's site, sitters are not only provided access to dog owners in their neighborhood, but they also enjoy safe and secure payments through the app, have two-way secure communication with the owners, and are covered by the Rover Guarantee.
It's easy to get started. Just visit rover.com/nobody. to create a free account and sign up online.
The Rover team will then review your profile, which shows your experience and background, as well as references and third-party verifications. Sign up at rover.com/nobody.
And once you're signed up as a sitter, list your services on Rover and start booking stays. A service is booked on Rover every 4 seconds. Check out rover.com/nobody to get started. And you say, too, that hesitation can really be the difference between life and death. Explain more about that.
So when I train people, I don't want people to ever not have fear. I think that's ridiculous. All these people that talk about no fear and all this crazy, chest thumping. But what I want to make sure is that my people don't freeze, that they don't hesitate. And you hesitate when you don't have anything in the toolbox, when you don't have an answer. And hesitation in a violent situation, unlike, hesitation, say, in a public interview. Like if for some reason in the middle of this interview, I just got stage fright and I couldn't continue on, it doesn't really affect, whether or not I'm going to be living.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can afford to get away from it. Whereas if I have hesitation in a life or death situation, it's probably the difference between me walking away and not walking away. And that's why it's really important how you train yourself to look at this subject. There's nothing more important, if your listeners aren't familiar with me, that's a really good sign. That means you've lived a good life and you probably haven't had anything really happen to you. The reason I like to do podcasts like this, and I really appreciate a chance to get out to your audience, is I'm trying to reach that 30% in my world. And what I mean by that is, of the 100% of my clients, 70% of them come to me after the fact, after violence has already affected them or somebody in their life. And I can't undo that. And the other 30% are people that were just proactive and they came in and they just wanted to get some information. And I'm always happy when those people show up, because that gives me the ability to, get to them ahead of time and possibly give them really great information that will help them avoid a situation that if they didn't have the information, they may have walked right into it.
And we're always told to be aware of our surroundings, but what exactly does that mean?
Well, everybody talks about situational awareness. And so I'll give you a perfect example of the stupidity of it and what real situational awareness is. I show a video. There's a video training that I put together on my YouTube channel where I show an elderly couple coming to a ATM. And they walk in there and you can see the woman walks up, and both of them are, they're older. They don't move as spryly as they used to. The one man has a limp. They're both a little bit overweight. And they go to the ATM and they end up getting attacked at the ATM. And it's a horrific attack and it really is hard to watch. But I've shown this to many of the industry experts and other people. And I said, okay, hey, what could they have done differently? What did they do wrong here? And everybody starts talking about, well, the woman went up to the ATM. The husband should have turned around and faced the parking lot and, looked at that. And he would have been more aware and he would have seen it coming. And then they'll talk about, they should have had, a car up there. They should have been more, aware and everything. And that's great. And then after everybody's done telling me all of this, I said, did anybody notice the timestamp on this video? Because it has one of those timestamps, what time of night it is. And it was nighttime, and it was 10:32 at night. Not one person in my industry noticed that. Not one person that I've ever asked noticed that. And my whole idea is situational awareness is what is so important that you couldn't have got up 20 minutes early the next day and gone to the ATM in the morning, because statistics precipitously after 8:30 at night at an ATM, your chances of getting attacked go through the roof compared to any other time. That's real situational awareness, not this false sense of, being on guard your whole life and walking around with a head on a swivel. That's just not practical. It's being smart. It's understanding. It's minimizing the chances of violence ever coming into your life. So behavior modification, to me, is far more important than phony situational awareness.
But what is your best advice if a person is walking alone, it's dark outside, nobody's around? How do you become aware of your circumstances there, and how do you prevent something from happening?
Yeah, or if you feel like somebody's following you.
Yeah.
Well, number one, don't walk around. Don't do that. You see, this is like life the way I want it. I should be able to walk at night by myself. I hear women say this all the time. I should be able to jog at night with my power beats on, and I can jog at 10:30 at night, and nobody should molest me. And I'm like, you're absolutely right. In a perfect world, that's great. And also in a perfect world, I shouldn't have to lock my doors at night in my neighborhood, because I live in a pretty nice neighborhood. I got a gated community and all this. And guess what? I lock my doors and have a security system.
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay. You can do these things. Like you can say, I'm going to go to a shopping mall and then I'm not going to valet the car because I'm going to save $10 or $20. And I'm going to park in the really far part of the parking lot. And I'm going to walk by myself through this parking lot all the way through. And you know what? I've got away with it before, so it'll be fine. Everything will be fine because I've got away with it before. And I call this, basically I have tons of people that do things that are the equivalent of sleeping with their heads on a railroad track. Mm-hmm. And they think just because the train doesn't come, that, the train's never going to come.
Right.
And my whole goal is to take your head off of the railroad track. So you look at a situation like that man coming out. He didn't have to cut through the park. He could have stayed in a really well-lit street that could have walked him home. Sure, it would have taken him probably an extra 10 or 15 minutes, but it would have been much harder for those two predators to run him down in a well-populated lit area.
It's all about minimizing your risk.
Yeah, it's just like anything else you do with this. I mean, I tell people all the time, the reason you need to understand self-protection, you need to understand this thing, it's a life skill. It's the same reason that parents want their kids to learn how to swim. Very few parents, I tell people all the time, I'll say, hey, how many people, have kids, and how many are you teaching your kids to swim? And the majority of them have the ability to say, yeah, I want my kid trained to swim. I go, great, because you want him to be the next Michael Phelps, right? You want to make sure that he gets 7 gold medals, and they all start laughing. And no, the reason is it's a life. I don't want my child to drown. Mm-hmm. And that's why I teach people how to, I teach my kids how to swim. It's the same thing with self-protection and learning this. I don't learn it because I want to use the information. I don't want to learn to swim and then, test whether or not I can, really push it and drown. But I want to make sure that my kids swim so they don't drown. And therefore, in self-protection, I want people to have enough knowledge. It's almost like CPR. No doctor would laugh at CPR. It's not, you're certainly not at the level of a doctor, but you can administer life-saving help with a little bit of training. And that's really what learning self-protection is all about. It's not about competing in a martial art or combat sport. That's completely different information. That's competition. It's not necessarily going to give you a direct path to being able to truly protect yourself in a violent situation. That's not denigrating combat sports and martial arts people. They're amazing athletes. I work with a lot of them. But if we just think about it for a minute, what makes a combat sport like a mixed martial arts match or a martial art that has competition, what makes it so fun to watch? And it comes down to the rules. And if you're going to look at violence and you're going to gamify violence, how can you gamify violence? What's the most important thing? Well, you have to take deliberate injury to the human body out of the equation, which is the exact information that you need if your life's on the line, because you don't want to compete with somebody. You want to make sure you can shut them down immediately. And the problem is, when I looked at the UFC the last time, they have 31 rules. 27 of the rules outlawed injury to the human body. And that basically just tells you the difference. You have to decide why you're training. If you're training for your own self-protection, then you want to make sure that you go direct to injury of the human body. And very, very few people and systems can correctly teach you that information.
Tim, our show is called Nobody Told Me, and we always ask our guests, what is your nobody told me lesson? So what is it that nobody told you about self-defense that you had to learn on your own and that you kind of wish someone had told you?
That the best way to learn is actually cooperative, not competitive training, meaning the best information comes from modeling information. Like we know, like in if you're really trying to improve yourself in any skill set or way, shape, or form, oftentimes slow, deliberate training gets you the best methodologies. I'll give you an example. In shooting, they have a mantra, and the mantra is slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And I used to think, and when I grew up originally with some of the combat sports that I learned, most of my training was very ballistic. It was very fast. It was very chaotic. When it came down to learning how to really protect myself, and I got this originally when I was trained in the SEAL teams. The first part of training in the SEAL teams is all physical. It's usually the stuff that most of the people see when they see films of it. It's guys running around with boats on their heads, wet, sandy, miserable, getting yelled at. What they don't show oftentimes is the next phase of training. Well, it was the next phase of training when I went through, which was weapons and explosives. When you get to weapons and explosives, the instructors aren't yelling and screaming. They aren't going crazy. They aren't doing anything ballistic. Everything is slow, methodical, and calm. And that's how you need to have this information installed. And so that was the biggest leap to me was it wasn't this, chest thumping, Rambo, tough guy stuff. It was just methodically learning where on the human body to go and slowly and deliberately learning to use the tools of your body and being able to place them in the correct areas of another partner. And that partner has to be cooperative. That partner has to allow you to go into these very vulnerable parts of the human body, and you get to model injury, and you do it slow, deliberate, and it's amazing the learning curve that you get from, they're calling it now deep practice. And I saw that you guys had interviewed Daniel Coyle from the Talent Code.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
So Daniel, I've interviewed him a couple of times. It's exact same thing. He talks about the music. He gives examples of, say, the music school up in upper state New York, where the rule is if a teacher can walk by one of the cabins and figure out the music that the kid is playing on his cello or on his violin, then he's going too fast. And that was probably the biggest change to me, was the experts, the real key people, are using some version of deep practice. I was just lucky enough that the instructor that I originally learned from just inherently trained people that way first. You had to earn your right to use velocity. The last thing you needed to add to anything was speed. And that probably was the biggest change, especially for a young man. We all, young men especially, we want to go hard and fast all the time. We think that's the only way to go. And to be able to slow down and do this deliberate practice, which, people like Daniel have really brought to the forefront. And then, of course, a lot of other great researchers. But applying it to your self-protection, I've never seen such gains in people's abilities once they've allowed themselves to do this slow practice.
That's an absolutely wonderful answer. Tim, how can people connect with you?
I'm on most of the social media platforms. At Tim Larkin TFT is my Instagram, and Facebook is either Target Focus Training or Tim Larkin. You'll find me either way. And of course, the website. If they want to take I got a really great masterclass out there. If they just go to surviveviolence.com, all one word, they can get a free masterclass, which really will take them through the concepts that you and I discussed, that we all discussed today, and then I'll go even further in depth. And, I think your folks would really get a lot out of it.
And what about your YouTube channel? What's on that?
Yeah, and then that's Tim Larkin again, the YouTube channel on that. If they go to Survive Violence, they'll get contacted with we give them all those assets. And you can find me on YouTube too. I'm all over the place.
Okay, and timlarkin.com is also a website for you.
Yes, it is.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, thank you so much, Tim, for joining us.
I really appreciate the opportunity.
Our thanks to our guest, self-defense expert Tim Larkin, whose latest book is called When Violence is the Answer, Learning How to Do What It Takes When Your Life is at Stake. I'm Jan Black.
And I'm Laura Owens.
You're listening to Nobody Told Me. Thank you so much for joining us.